The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Bravo as Staff Sergeant Maya Chen adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. The other soldiers in her unit pretended not to watch, but she could feel their eyes on her. At 25, she was the youngest sniper in the regiment and the only woman. Most days, that felt like carrying an extra 100 pounds of gear. "Chen, you sure you can handle that rifle?" Corporal Davis called out, his voice carrying that familiar mix of mockery and doubt. "Maybe we should get you something smaller, more your size." Maya didn't look up from her weapon cleaning. She had learned long ago that responding to every jab would exhaust her before the real fight even began. Instead, she methodically checked each component of her M24 sniper rifle, the same weapon she had qualified expert with 6 times running. "Leave her alone, Davis," said Sergeant Rodriguez, though his tone suggested he was more annoyed by the interruption than concerned for Maya's feelings. "She shoots better than you do." This was true, and everyone knew it. Maya's accuracy scores were consistently in the top 3% of all military snipers. Her longest confirmed kill was 1,147 meters, made during a Taliban ambush 6 months earlier. But statistics meant little when you were a small woman in a world built for large men. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, emerged from the communications tent with a grave expression. Behind him walked Captain Mills, the unit's executive officer, and Sergeant Major Thompson, a mountain of a man who had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. "Listen up," Harrison called out. The scattered conversations around the base died instantly. "We've got a situation developing 15 clicks northeast. Reconnaissance reports indicate that Commander Williams and his advance team are pinned down by enemy forces. Their communication went dark 40 minutes ago." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Commander Williams was the regional operations chief, a decorated veteran whose strategic mind had saved countless American lives over his 20-year career. If he was captured or killed, it would be a devastating blow to their entire operation in this sector. "The enemy appears to have significant numbers and heavy weapons," Harrison continued. "Air support is unavailable due to weather conditions, and our main force is engaged in operations 60 kilometers south. We need a small team to assess the situation and, if possible, extract the commander and his men." Thompson stepped forward. "Sir, I recommend sending Team Alpha. Martinez and his men know that terrain better than anyone." "Martinez's team is still recovering from their last mission," Mills replied. "Half his squad is in the medical tent with dysentery." Maya's unit leader, Sergeant First Class Johnson, raised his hand. "My team is ready, sir. We've got fresh intel on enemy movement patterns in that area." Harrison nodded slowly, but Maya could see the concern in his eyes. Johnson's team was skilled, but they specialized in defensive operations and base security. This mission would require precision, stealth, and the ability to think quickly under extreme pressure. "Johnson, your team will provide overwatch and communication support," Harrison decided. "But I need someone who can get close enough to assess the situation without being detected. Someone who can take precise shots if necessary and move quickly through hostile territory." The base fell silent, except for the distant rumble of generators and the occasional crack of automatic weapons fire from training exercises. Maya realized this was her moment. She could feel the weight of every doubt, every skeptical glance, every whispered conversation about whether she belonged here. "Sir," she said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I volunteer for the reconnaissance mission." The silence deepened. Davis let out a barely audible snort. Thompson frowned and shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Chen," Harrison said carefully, "this isn't a training exercise. We're talking about moving through actively hostile territory with unknown enemy strength. The person we send might be on their own for hours." "I understand, sir," Maya replied. "I know that terrain better than anyone here except Martinez's team. I've logged over 200 hours on solo reconnaissance missions in similar environments. My movement profile is smaller and quieter than anyone else in the unit." "She's got a point about the movement profile," Johnson admitted reluctantly. "Chen can move through brush like a ghost. I've seen her do it." Thompson crossed his arms over his massive chest. "Begging your pardon, sir, but this mission requires someone who can carry a wounded man if necessary. No disrespect to Chen, but she weighs maybe 120 soaking wet." 135 pounds of pure stubbornness, Rodriguez muttered, earning a few chuckles from the assembled soldiers. Maya felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sergeant Major Thompson is right about my size," she said. "But this mission isn't about carrying wounded soldiers. It's about gathering intelligence and, if necessary, providing precision support to help the commander and his men extract themselves." Harrison studied her for a long moment. Maya could see him weighing the risks, calculating the odds, considering the political implications of sending a female soldier on a high-stakes solo mission. "What's your assessment of the tactical situation?" he asked. Maya had been studying the maps and intelligence reports since the morning briefing. Based on enemy movement patterns over the past week, they're likely using the old mining complex as a staging area. The terrain provides natural cover and multiple escape routes. If Commander Williams is pinned down, it's probably in the valley approach where the road narrows. The enemy would have positioned themselves on the high ground to control the bottleneck. "And your recommended approach?" "Come in from the northwest ridge. It's a longer route, but it provides the best observation positions and multiple fallback options. If I can get eyes on the situation, I can determine whether this is a rescue mission or a recovery mission." Mills nodded approvingly. Maya's tactical analysis was sound, and they all knew it. "The weather forecast shows possible storm activity this afternoon," Thompson pointed out. "Heavy rain, limited visibility, not ideal conditions for precision work." "Actually, Sergeant Major, that weather might work in our favor," Maya replied. "Rain will mask movement sounds and limit enemy visibility as much as ours. If I can get into position before the weather turns, I'll have a significant advantage." Harrison looked around the group of assembled soldiers. Maya could see the internal debate playing out on his face. Every instinct told him to send someone bigger, stronger, more experienced. But Maya's analysis was the most thorough. Her knowledge of the terrain was extensive, and her marksmanship skills were undeniable. "Sir," Davis interjected, "maybe we should wait for air support. This seems like a job for Apache helicopters, not a solo sniper." "Weather has grounded all aircraft indefinitely," Mills replied, "and we can't afford to wait. Every hour that passes decreases the chances of finding the commander and his men alive." Maya stepped closer to the command group. "Sir, I know what everyone is thinking. I know I don't fit the profile of what you expect in a soldier for this type of mission. But I've trained my entire adult life for exactly this kind of operation. I can move faster and quieter than anyone else here. I can make shots that matter when they matter most, and I will not let Commander Williams and his men down." The conviction in her voice surprised even her. She had spoken from a place deeper than training or technique, from a place where doubt and fear lived alongside an unshakable determination to prove herself worthy of the trust her fellow soldiers had placed in her. Harrison made his decision. "Chen, you'll take the reconnaissance mission. Johnson, your team will provide communication relay and extraction support from position Echo 7. Chen will have complete tactical autonomy once she's in the field, but she'll report status every 30 minutes. Thompson looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded. "What's your gear loadout, Chen?" Maya had been mentally preparing her equipment list since the moment the mission was announced. M24 rifle with day and night optics, 300 rounds of match-grade ammunition, lightweight combat gear, 72 hours of rations and water, medical kit, communications equipment, and backup extraction beacon. "That's a lot of weight for someone your size," Johnson observed. "I'll manage, Sergeant." Harrison checked his watch. You have 30 minutes to prepare and brief your route plan. I want you moving out before the weather turns. Questions? Maya had 1,000 questions, but none that could be answered standing in the middle of forward operating base Bravo. She would find her answers in the field, one careful step at a time. No questions, sir. As the command group dispersed, Maya felt the familiar mix of excitement and terror that preceded every dangerous mission. She had lobbied for this assignment not just to prove herself, but because she genuinely believed she was the best person for the job. Now, she had exactly 30 minutes to make sure her equipment supported that belief. Rodriguez fell into step beside her as she walked toward the armory. You know what you're getting into, right? This isn't a qualification course or a training exercise. If the enemy has the numbers intelligence suggests, you could be walking into a situation where extraction isn't possible. Maya stopped and looked at him directly. Would you be asking me that if I was 6'2" and 200 pounds of muscle? Rodriguez considered this for a moment, then shook his head. No, I probably wouldn't. Then don't ask me now. I know exactly what I'm getting into. I'm getting into the opportunity to bring our people home. In the armory, Maya methodically checked each piece of equipment. Her rifle was her most trusted companion, a precision instrument that had never failed her when she needed it most. The weapon had been modified to her specific measurements and shooting style. The trigger was adjusted to her preference, the stock was customized for her arm length, and the scope was zeroed to her unique point of aim. As she packed her gear, other soldiers drifted by with various excuses to check on her preparation. Some offered genuine encouragement, others seemed to be looking for signs that she was in over her head. Maya appreciated the support and ignored the skepticism with equal measure. Davis appeared in the armory doorway, his expression more serious than usual. Chen, I know I give you a hard time, but I want you to know something. You're a better soldier than most of the men I've served with. You don't need to prove anything to anybody. Maya looked up from her gear packing, surprised by the unexpected show of support. Thank you, Davis. That means more than you know. Just bring yourself home, okay? And if you can manage it, bring the commander home too. Maya finished her preparations with 15 minutes to spare. Her gear was arranged for maximum efficiency and minimum weight. Every piece of equipment had been checked twice. Her weapon was loaded and ready. Her route was planned with 3 alternate extraction points identified. As she made her final preparations, Maya thought about all the moments that had led her to this point. The childhood spent hunting with her grandfather, learning patience and precision in the woods of Montana. The decision to join the Army instead of accepting the college scholarship her parents had wanted her to take. The years of training, proving herself repeatedly in environments designed to break down anyone who wasn't completely committed. She had endured the doubt, the extra scrutiny, the assumption that she was somehow less capable than her male counterparts. She had worked twice as hard for half the recognition, smiled through comments that would have ended careers if they had been directed at anyone else. She had done all of this for the opportunity to serve her country alongside soldiers she respected and admired. Now, finally, she had the chance to demonstrate that all of that preparation had been worthwhile. Commander Williams and his men were depending on her. Her unit was depending on her. Most importantly, she was depending on herself to be everything she had always claimed to be. The storm clouds were gathering on the horizon as Maya made her way to the perimeter checkpoint. Johnson and his team were already in position at the communication relay point. Harrison and Mills were monitoring radio communications from the command post. "Chen!" Harrison called out as she approached the gate. "Remember, this is reconnaissance first. Don't take any unnecessary risks. If the situation is beyond recovery, we need to know that too." "Understood, sir." "And Chen?" "Good hunting." Maya adjusted her pack straps one final time and checked her compass heading. The mission clock was now running, and Commander Williams was somewhere out there in hostile territory, counting on her to bring help or information that would save his life and the lives of his men. As she disappeared into the brush beyond the base perimeter, Maya carried with her the hopes and doubts of every soldier she was leaving behind. She also carried something else, an absolute determination to prove that courage and skill mattered more than size and gender, and that sometimes the most unlikely hero was exactly the right person for an impossible mission. The first 3 kilometers passed in perfect silence. Maya moved through the dense undergrowth like water flowing around stones, her footfalls carefully placed to avoid the small branches and loose rocks that could betray her position. The landscape was a patchwork of jagged ridges and narrow valleys, carved by centuries of seasonal flooding and erosion. Her radio crackled softly every 30 minutes as she checked in with Johnson's relay team. Echo 7, this is Lone Wolf. Position checkpoint Alpha, no contact, continuing northwest. Copy, Lone Wolf. Weather Service reports storm front moving faster than expected. You've got maybe 2 hours before heavy rain. Maya acknowledged and pressed forward. The accelerated timeline meant less opportunity for careful reconnaissance, but it also meant the enemy would have less time to reinforce their positions or move Commander Williams and his team to a more secure location. As she climbed toward the ridgeline, Maya's mind ran through tactical scenarios. Intelligence suggested the enemy force numbered between 30 and 50 fighters, armed with automatic weapons and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. Commander Williams had been traveling with a team of 8 soldiers, including a medic and a communications specialist. If they were still alive, they would be heavily outnumbered and low on ammunition. The terrain began to change as she approached the observation point she had identified on her map. The thick forest gave way to rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. Maya moved even more carefully now, using natural cover to mask her approach. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated to minimize her visibility profile. Through her rifle scope, she could see smoke rising from the valley below. The thin gray column suggested a vehicle fire, probably the Humvee that had been carrying Commander Williams and his team. Her heart rate increased slightly, but she forced herself to maintain the steady breathing pattern that kept her hands stable and her mind clear. Maya positioned herself behind a fallen tree on the ridge line and began her systematic observation of the target area. Through her scope, the scene below became clear and troubling. The burned-out hulk of an American military vehicle sat in the middle of the narrow valley road. Around it, she could see signs of a fierce firefight, bullet holes in the rocks, scattered equipment, and dark stains on the ground that could only be blood. The enemy had positioned themselves exactly as she had predicted. Machine gun positions were visible on both sides of the valley, providing overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. Maya counted at least 12 enemy fighters from her current position, but she knew there were more hidden in positions she couldn't see. More importantly, she spotted movement near a cluster of large boulders about 200 meters from the destroyed vehicle. Through her scope, she could see what appeared to be American soldiers, alive but clearly wounded and pinned down. One figure was larger than the others, wearing the distinctive combat gear of a senior officer, Commander Williams. Maya's radio whispered in her earpiece. "Lone Wolf, this is Echo 7. Status report." "Echo 7, I have eyes on the objective," she replied quietly. "Commander Williams and at least 4 members of his team are alive but pinned down in hostile territory. Enemy strength appears to be at least 40 fighters with heavy weapons. Recommend immediate air support." "Negative, Lone Wolf. Weather has worsened. No air assets available for minimum 6 hours. Can you assess possibility of ground extraction?" Maya studied the battlefield through her scope. The enemy positions were well chosen and heavily defended. Any attempt to reach Commander Williams would require crossing open ground under direct fire from multiple directions. It was, by any conventional military assessment, an impossible situation, but Maya had never been particularly interested in conventional military assessments. Echo 7, I'm going to need you to create a diversion. Can your team establish a false radio signature about 3 kilometers south of your current position? Explain your plan, Lone Wolf. Maya was already calculating distances and angles in her head. I'm going to convince the enemy that a large rescue force is approaching from the south. When they reposition to counter that threat, I'll have a window to move closer to the commander's position. There was a long pause before Johnson's voice came back over the radio. Lone Wolf, that's a suicide mission. Even if you reach the commander, you'll never make it out on foot carrying wounded soldiers. Let me worry about that, Echo 7. Can you create the diversion or not? Another pause. Maya could imagine the conversation happening at the relay position as Johnson weighed the risks against the potential for success. Affirmative, Lone Wolf. Give us 20 minutes to reposition. We'll light up their radio intercepts with traffic indicating a mechanized infantry approach from Grid 7-7 Alpha. Understood. I'll begin my approach in 25 minutes. Maya used the waiting time to study every detail of the enemy positions. She identified the key machine gun nests, the probable location of the enemy commander, and the most likely routes for moving wounded soldiers under fire. Most importantly, she spotted what appeared to be a natural depression in the ground that would provide cover for most of the distance between her position and the stranded Americans. The deception worked better than she had hoped. 18 minutes after Johnson's team began transmitting false radio traffic, Maya watched through her scope as nearly half the enemy force moved south to establish defensive positions against the non-existent mechanized attack. The remaining fighters were still formidable, but the odds had improved significantly. Maya began her descent into the valley, moving from cover to cover with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of battlefield movement. Every step was planned 3 moves ahead. Every pause was calculated to take advantage of terrain features that would break up her silhouette. The depression she had spotted from above turned out to be even better than she had hoped. It was a dry stream bed, carved deep enough to provide concealment for someone moving in a low crouch. Maya followed it for nearly 100 meters, bringing her within 50 yards of Commander Williams's position. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the situation clearly for the first time. Commander Williams was conscious but bleeding from a head wound. 3 of his soldiers were in various states of injury. One appeared to be unconscious. Another was holding a field dressing against his shoulder, and the third was providing security with his rifle, despite an obvious leg wound. Maya's radio crackled with urgent whispers. Unknown American position, this is Lone Wolf. Can you hear me? Movement from behind the rocks indicated that someone had heard her transmission. A voice came back, weak but unmistakably authoritative. Lone Wolf, this is Commander Williams. Who the hell are you and where did you come from? Sir, I'm Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, sniper attached to the 3rd Infantry. I'm here to get you out. There was a pause before Williams responded. Sergeant Chen, I appreciate the sentiment, but we're pinned down by superior forces with limited ammunition. Unless you've got a tank in your back pocket, extraction is not viable. Maya smiled grimly as she studied the remaining enemy positions. Sir, I don't have a tank, but I do have a plan. I need you to be ready to move on my signal. Can your wounded soldiers travel? Kowalski has a concussion, Martinez has a shoulder wound, and Stevens has shrapnel in his leg. They can move, but not quickly. Understood, sir. In approximately 3 minutes, I'm going to create a distraction. When you hear my rifle, move toward the stream bed about 20 meters to your northwest. Stay low and stay together. Maya positioned herself carefully and began target selection. The enemy machine gun position on the eastern ridge was her primary concern. If she could eliminate that threat, Commander Williams and his men would have a clear route to the stream bed. The secondary threats were the two sniper positions she had identified on the western slope. The first shot was the most important. Maya controlled her breathing, calculated the wind drift, and gently squeezed the trigger. The enemy machine gunner dropped silently, his weapon falling useless beside him. The second shot came 3 seconds later, taking out the spotter beside the machine gun before he could sound an alarm. The third shot eliminated one of the western snipers, but by then the enemy was beginning to react to the attack. Shouts echoed across the valley as fighters scrambled to identify the source of the precise fire. "Move now!" Maya called into her radio. She watched through her scope as Commander Williams and his team began their fighting withdrawal toward her position. The unconscious soldier was being carried by his two less wounded comrades, while Williams provided rear security. Enemy fire began to concentrate on their movement, but Maya was ready. Her rifle spoke again and again, each shot carefully aimed to disrupt the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. She wasn't trying to kill every enemy fighter. She was trying to create enough chaos and confusion to give Williams and his men the time they needed to reach safety. The plan was working until an enemy fighter with an RPG launcher appeared on the southern ridge. Maya saw him raise the weapon and knew immediately that he had a clear shot at Commander Williams and his men as they moved across the open ground. Without hesitation, Maya shifted her aim to the RPG operator. It was a difficult shot at nearly 400 meters, complicated by the need for extreme precision to avoid hitting the rocket-propelled grenade itself. If her bullet struck the warhead, the explosion could kill everyone in the valley, including the soldiers she was trying to save. Maya exhaled slowly and fired. The enemy fighter dropped backward off the ridge, his weapon falling harmlessly into the rocks below. "Keep moving," she called to Williams. "You're almost to the stream bed." But Maya's position was now compromised. Enemy fire was beginning to concentrate on her location as the remaining fighters identified her as the primary threat to their ambush. Bullets snapped through the air around her, chipping rock fragments from the boulders that provided her cover. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the enemy could maneuver into a position to overwhelm her defensive position. That was enough time to ensure that Commander Williams and his men reached the stream bed, but probably not enough time for her to withdraw safely. Maya made a decision that she knew might cost her life, but would definitely save the lives of 4 American soldiers. Instead of falling back, she moved to a more exposed position that gave her better lines of sight to the remaining enemy threats. Her rifle spoke with mechanical precision, each shot carefully placed to maintain maximum pressure on the enemy force. She could hear Williams and his men reaching the safety of the stream bed behind her, but she also knew that her own options for withdrawal were disappearing rapidly. "Lone Wolf, this is Echo 7. We're receiving heavy enemy radio traffic. Sounds like they're calling for reinforcements." Maya's ammunition was running low, and the enemy was beginning to coordinate their attacks more effectively. She had perhaps 5 minutes before her position became completely untenable. "Echo 7, I need immediate extraction support at grid reference 88 Charlie. Commander Williams and his team are secure, but my position is about to be overrun." "Negative, Lone Wolf. We don't have the assets to reach your position." Maya looked down into the stream bed where Commander Williams was looking back at her with an expression of grim understanding. He knew exactly what she had done and what it was likely to cost her. The enemy fire was intensifying now as more fighters moved into position around her location. Maya realized she had maybe 2 minutes before they could surround her completely. Then Commander Williams did something that surprised her. Instead of continuing his withdrawal to safety, he began climbing out of the stream bed back toward her position. "Sir, what are you doing?" Maya called into her radio. "Get your men out of here." "Negative, Sergeant Chen," Williams replied, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a combat veteran who had been making life-and-death decisions for 20 years. "You came here to save my men. I'm not leaving you behind." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a combination of gratitude and terror that someone was willing to risk everything to help her. But she also knew that Williams's decision could get them all killed if they couldn't execute a withdrawal under fire. "Sir, with respect, your men need medical attention. I can hold this position long enough for you to reach the extraction point." "My men can wait 5 minutes," Williams replied, already moving toward her position with the practiced efficiency of an experienced soldier. "But you can't hold that position alone." Maya realized that the situation had fundamentally changed. What had started as a rescue mission was now becoming a mutual extraction under the most dangerous possible conditions. The storm clouds that had been building all afternoon finally opened, sending heavy rain across the battlefield. The sudden change in weather would limit visibility and muffle sound, creating both opportunities and dangers for everyone involved in the firefight. Maya gathered her equipment and prepared to move. Commander Williams was right about one thing. She couldn't hold her current position much longer. But if they were going to extract together, they would need to move quickly and decisively before the enemy could adapt to the changing conditions. "Echo 7, this is Lone Wolf. Weather has turned in our favor. Beginning coordinated withdrawal with all personnel. Estimate 15 minutes to your position." "Copy, Lone Wolf. We'll be ready for you." Maya looked at Commander Williams as he reached her position. Despite his head wound and the extreme danger of their situation, he was smiling. "Sergeant Chen," he said, "I don't know what they're paying you, but it's not enough." Maya returned the smile as she shouldered her rifle and prepared to move. "Thank you, sir. Now let's get everyone home." The rain was falling harder now, turning the rocky terrain slippery and treacherous. But Maya knew they could use the weather to their advantage if they moved quickly enough. The hardest part of their mission was about to begin. The rain turned the battlefield into a slippery maze of mud and loose rock. Maya and Commander Williams moved through the stream bed together, supporting his wounded soldiers and maintaining constant vigilance for enemy movement. The weather that had seemed like an advantage was quickly becoming a dangerous liability as the dry creek bed began to fill with rushing water. "We need to get to higher ground," Williams said, water streaming down his face from the deepening gash on his forehead. "This whole area is going to flood if the rain keeps up." Maya checked her map through the plastic protection of her equipment pouch. The nearest high ground that offered concealment was a rocky ridge about 800 meters northwest of their current position. It would mean crossing open terrain under possible enemy observation, but staying in the stream bed was no longer an option. "Sir, there's a problem," came Kowalski's voice from behind them. The soldier with the concussion was being supported by Martinez, whose shoulder wound was bleeding more heavily in the rain. "Stevens can't put any weight on his leg. The shrapnel went deeper than we thought." Maya turned to assess Stevens, who was pale and sweating despite the cold rain. His leg wound was worse than anyone had realized, and the movement from their initial position had aggravated the injury significantly. "How much weight can you bear?" she asked Stevens directly. "I can hop along for a while longer." "Sergeant, but I'm slowing everyone down. Maybe you should leave me with some ammunition and come back for me later." "That's not happening," Williams said firmly. "We all leave together or nobody leaves." Maya studied their tactical situation. 5 soldiers, 3 of them wounded, moving across open terrain in deteriorating weather with an unknown number of enemy fighters pursuing them. Under normal circumstances, the situation would be categorized as hopeless. But Maya had stopped thinking in terms of normal circumstances the moment she volunteered for this mission. "Sir, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Williams managed a tired smile. "Sergeant Chen, I've already watched you single-handedly take apart an enemy ambush and save my men's lives. At this point, I'm inclined to trust your judgment completely." Maya pointed toward the ridgeline they needed to reach. "If we move as a group, we're too slow and too visible. But if we split up and create multiple movement signatures, we can confuse the enemy about our actual route and destination. Explain. You take Martinez and Kowalski and move directly toward the extraction point using the terrain depression to the north. I'll take Stevens and move along the southern route. The enemy will have to split their pursuit, and whoever has the easier route will make it through. Williams studied her face for a long moment. Sergeant, you're talking about taking the most wounded soldier along the most dangerous route. That's not tactics, that's suicide. No, sir, it's probability. Stevens and I will be harder to track because there are only two of us. I can move quietly enough to avoid detection, and if we do make contact, I can provide covering fire while you get the other wounded soldiers to safety. Before Williams could respond, the sound of mortar rounds whistling overhead interrupted their conversation. The first explosions landed about 50 meters behind them, sending up geysers of mud and shattered rock. They're ranging in on our position, Williams said urgently. We need to move now, regardless of the plan. Maya made a command decision. Sir, take your men and go north. Stevens and I will provide a diversion and meet you at the extraction point. Sergeant Chen, sir, with respect, we don't have time to debate this. Go. The next mortar rounds landed closer, and Maya could hear the distant sound of enemy voices calling out coordinates. She helped Stevens to his feet and began moving south along the ridge line, away from the route Williams would take with the other wounded soldiers. For the first few minutes, the plan seemed to work perfectly. The enemy fire followed Maya and Stevens, giving Williams and his men the opportunity to move without being detected. Stevens was moving better than expected, using his rifle as a makeshift crutch and gritting his teeth against the obvious pain. How are you holding up? Maya asked as they paused behind a cluster of boulders. I've been better, Sergeant, but I've also been worse. That time in Fallujah when we got caught in that IED blast, I was sure I was going to die. This just feels like a really unpleasant training exercise. Maya was impressed by Stevens's attitude. Despite his injury and their desperate situation, he was maintaining his sense of humor and his fighting spirit. She was beginning to understand why Commander Williams had been so determined not to leave any of his men behind. They had covered about half the distance to the extraction point when the mortar barrage suddenly intensified. Instead of the random harassment fire they had been receiving, the incoming rounds began falling in a systematic pattern that suggested the enemy had visual contact with their position. They can see us, Stevens said, stating the obvious with remarkable calm. Maya studied the terrain ahead. They were about to cross the most exposed section of their route, a rocky slope that offered minimal cover and would leave them visible to observers for several minutes. Under normal circumstances, she would wait for darkness or call for suppressive fire to cover their movement. But Stevens was losing blood steadily, and the mortar fire was getting more accurate. Normal circumstances had ceased to apply hours ago. Stevens, I need you to listen to me carefully. In about 30 seconds, we're going to move across that slope as fast as possible. I know your leg is hurt, but I need you to keep up with me no matter what. Can you do that? Stevens checked his rifle and adjusted his improvised bandage. I can do whatever you need me to do, Sergeant. Maya felt a surge of pride in this soldier who refused to give up despite pain and exhaustion that would have defeated most people. She was beginning to understand that the real measure of a soldier wasn't physical strength or size, but the willingness to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. They began their movement across the exposed slope just as another series of mortar rounds exploded behind them. Maya could hear the distinctive crack of sniper fire now, indicating that the enemy had moved marksmen into position to cover the approaches to the extraction point. Halfway across the slope, Stevens stumbled and fell. Maya turned back to help him up and saw that his leg wound had reopened, soaking his pants with blood. I can't make it, Sergeant, he said, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Leave me here and save yourself. Maya looked at the distance they still had to cover and calculated the time it would take to move a wounded man across the remaining terrain. Every tactical manual she had ever studied would recommend abandoning the wounded soldier to save herself and preserve her ability to fight another day. Instead, she slung her rifle across her back and grabbed Stevens under his arms. "Stevens, you're about to discover that being small has certain advantages. I've been carrying heavy packs since I was 12 years old. You're just another piece of equipment." Maya was stronger than her size suggested, but Stevens was still a fully grown man in combat gear. Carrying him across broken terrain while under enemy fire was going to push her physical capabilities beyond anything she had ever attempted. But as she began moving with Stevens's weight on her shoulders, Maya discovered something important about herself. The strength she needed wasn't coming from her muscles alone. It was coming from the absolute refusal to let down a soldier who was counting on her, from the determination to prove that courage mattered more than size, and from the knowledge that every step was bringing them closer to safety. The enemy fire intensified as they moved across the slope. Mortar rounds were exploding close enough to shower them with dirt and rock fragments. Sniper bullets cracked past them, close enough to hear the distinctive snap of supersonic projectiles passing nearby. Maya focused on putting one foot in front of the other, maintaining her balance on the slippery rocks while carrying Stevens's weight. Her legs were burning with fatigue. Her lungs were screaming for air, and her shoulders felt like they were being crushed by the combined weight of her equipment and the wounded soldier. But she kept moving. "Lone Wolf, this is Echo 7. Came Johnson's voice over the radio. "We can see muzzle flashes from your position. Are you in contact?" Maya couldn't spare the breath to respond immediately. She was focused entirely on the rhythm of movement. Step, balance, step, balance. Ignore the pain, ignore the fear, ignore everything except the next step forward. "Echo 7, she finally gasped into her radio microphone. "This is Lone Wolf. I'm carrying a wounded soldier across enemy fire. Request immediate suppressive fire on the eastern ridge line. Roger, Lone Wolf. Suppressive fire in 30 seconds. Keep your heads down." Maya heard the distinctive sound of American machine gun fire opening up from Johnson's position. The suppressive fire wasn't close enough to eliminate the enemy threats, but it was effective enough to disrupt their ability to place accurate fire on her position. She used the breathing room to adjust Stevens's position on her shoulders and check their route to the extraction point. They were less than 200 meters away now, but the final approach would require crossing a small clearing that offered no cover whatsoever. "Stevens, how are you doing?" she asked. "Still breathing, Sergeant, but I think I'm getting blood on your uniform." Maya almost laughed despite their desperate situation. "Stevens, we're both covered in mud, blood, and God knows what else. I don't think anyone's going to notice a few extra stains." The suppressive fire from Johnson's team had temporarily reduced the incoming enemy fire, but Maya could see movement on the ridge line that suggested the enemy was repositioning for a final assault on their position. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the enemy could coordinate a concentrated attack that would make further movement impossible. Maya gathered her strength for the final push across the clearing. Stevens had lost consciousness sometime during the past few minutes, which made him dead weight, but also eliminated any pain he might be experiencing. She adjusted her grip on his combat gear and began moving as quickly as her exhausted legs would carry her. She was halfway across the clearing when the mortar barrage resumed with devastating intensity. The enemy had apparently decided to saturate the entire area rather than trying to place precision fire. Explosions erupted all around her, close enough to feel the concussion waves and hot enough to singe the air she was breathing. Maya stumbled and fell to one knee as a particularly close explosion knocked her off balance. For a moment, she considered the possibility that she might not make it across the clearing. Stevens was unconscious and bleeding. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, and the enemy fire was intensifying. But as she knelt in the mud with Stevens's weight on her shoulders, Maya remembered something her grandfather had told her during those hunting trips in Montana years ago. Maya, being tough isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. Being tough is about deciding you're not going to quit, no matter what happens. She pushed herself back to her feet and kept moving. The extraction point appeared ahead of her like a miracle. Johnson and his team had established a defensive perimeter around a natural depression in the rocks that provided excellent cover from enemy fire. Maya could see Commander Williams and his wounded soldiers already in position, along with several soldiers from Johnson's team. "Incoming!" someone shouted as Maya stumbled into the perimeter. Hands reached out to take Stevens's weight from her shoulders and pull both of them into cover. Maya collapsed against a boulder, her legs finally giving out after carrying her and Stevens across nearly a kilometer of hostile terrain under enemy fire. "Medical!" Johnson called out. "We need a medic for Stevens and Chen!" Maya realized that she was wounded. Somewhere during the movement across the clearing, shrapnel from one of the mortar rounds had torn a gash in her left arm. She hadn't noticed the injury while she was carrying Stevens. But now that the adrenaline was wearing off, she could feel the burning pain and see the blood soaking through her sleeve. Commander Williams appeared beside her, his own head wound bandaged, but his expression alert and concerned. "Sergeant Chen, how badly are you hurt?" "I'm fine, sir," Maya replied automatically, though her voice was weak and shaky. "How is Stevens?" "Stevens is going to be fine, thanks to you. The medic says he's lost a lot of blood, but there's no permanent damage to the leg. He'll be back on active duty in a few months." Maya nodded and tried to stand up. But her legs weren't cooperating. The combination of exhaustion, blood loss, and the adrenaline crash was making it difficult to coordinate her movements. "Sergeant," Williams said quietly, "you just carried a 180-pound soldier across 800 meters of hostile terrain while under direct enemy fire. I think you're allowed to sit down for a few minutes." Johnson appeared with a field radio and a grim expression. "Sir, we've got a problem. The enemy has moved blocking forces into position between us and the main base. We're effectively surrounded until air support can reach our position." Williams studied the tactical map. "How long until the weather clears enough for helicopter extraction?" "Weather Service estimates minimum 4 hours, possibly longer." Maya looked around at the assembled soldiers. Commander Williams and his 3 wounded men, plus Johnson's team of 6 soldiers, plus herself. 13 people total, with limited ammunition and no heavy weapons, surrounded by an enemy force of unknown size and capabilities. Under normal circumstances, their situation would be desperate. But Maya had learned over the past few hours that normal circumstances were often just limitations that existed in people's minds, rather than actual barriers to success. "Sir," she said, her voice stronger now that she had caught her breath, "I have an idea." Williams looked at her with an expression that was part admiration and part concern. "Sergeant Chen, you've already done more than enough for one day. Let someone else take the next risk." Maya checked her rifle and counted her remaining ammunition. She had enough for maybe 30 precise shots, which wouldn't be enough for a conventional firefight, but might be exactly what they needed for something less conventional. "Sir, the enemy thinks they have us trapped, but they don't know exactly where we are or what our capabilities are. If I can get back to an overwatch position, I can provide precision fire support while the rest of the team moves to a better defensive position." "Absolutely not," Williams replied immediately. "You're wounded, you're exhausted, and you've already taken enough risks for one lifetime. We'll wait for air support." But Johnson was studying Maya with a thoughtful expression. "What kind of overwatch position did you have in mind, Chen?" Maya pointed toward a rocky outcropping about 300 meters from their current position. "That ridgeline provides observation over all the approaches to this position. If I can get up there without being detected, I can provide early warning and precision fire against any enemy attack." "It's too dangerous," Williams said. "If they spot you up there, you'll be completely isolated." Sir, with respect, I've been isolated in hostile territory for most of this mission. It's actually easier when you don't have to worry about anyone else's safety. Williams looked around at his wounded soldiers and Johnson's team. Maya could see him calculating the odds, weighing the risks against the potential benefits of having a skilled sniper in an overwatch position. "Sergeant Chen," he said finally, "you've already proven yourself a dozen times over. You don't need to prove anything else to anyone." Maya realized that Williams was right about one thing. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. Somewhere during the mission, she had stopped thinking about whether she was good enough or tough enough or strong enough. She had started thinking like a soldier whose job was to bring everyone home safely. "Sir, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to finish the mission." Williams studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "How long do you need to get into position?" Maya checked her equipment and calculated the route to the ridge line. "Give me 20 minutes to get up there and establish a defensive position, then we can coordinate any movement you need to make." As Maya prepared to leave the relative safety of the extraction point, Stevens regained consciousness long enough to grab her sleeve. "Sergeant," he said weakly, "thank you for not leaving me behind." Maya knelt beside him and smiled. "Stevens, leaving soldiers behind isn't something we do. That's what makes us different from the people shooting at us." She gathered her equipment and prepared to move out for what she hoped would be the final phase of their mission. The storm was beginning to clear, which meant air support would be available soon. She just needed to keep everyone alive until help arrived. As Maya disappeared into the rocks above the extraction point, she carried with her the knowledge that she had already accomplished something important. She had proven that courage and determination were more valuable than size and strength. That a soldier's worth was measured by their willingness to risk everything for their fellow soldiers. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself that no training exercise could have taught her. She had discovered that when everything was on the line and failure meant that good people would die, she could find strength and capability that she never knew existed. The mission wasn't over yet, but Maya Chen was no longer the soldier who had volunteered for a reconnaissance mission that morning. She was someone who had been tested under the most extreme conditions possible and had emerged as exactly the kind of soldier she had always hoped she could become. 3 hours later, when the helicopters finally arrived to extract the entire team, Maya was still in her overwatch position. Having successfully prevented 2 enemy attacks on the extraction point, she had carried Commander Williams to safety, saved Stevens's life, and brought everyone home. But most importantly, she had proven that sometimes the most unlikely hero was exactly the right person for an impossible mission. The doubts and skepticism that had followed her throughout her military career had been replaced by something more valuable: the absolute respect of soldiers who had watched her risk everything to save people she barely knew. Commander Williams would later write in his official report that Staff Sergeant Maya Chen had displayed courage and tactical competence far beyond her rank and experience, and that her actions had directly resulted in the successful extraction of his entire team. But for Maya, the real victory was simpler than that. She had volunteered for an impossible mission and had refused to quit until everyone was safe. In the end, that was exactly what being a soldier meant.